What started as a simple morning coffee delivery turned into an international incident that nearly caused a diplomatic crisis between two nations. When Marcus Chun, a 28-year-old travel blogger from California, decided to surprise a stoic royal guard with a warm cup of coffee on a freezing London morning, he had no idea his act of kindness would trigger a chain of events involving Scotland Yard, international news networks, and the highest levels of government. This is the true story of how one tourist's innocent gesture created chaos that rippled through Buckingham Palace, sparked heated debates in Parliament, revolutionized royal security protocols, and ultimately changed how the world views the humanity behind the iconic red uniforms. It's a tale of misunderstandings, unexpected friendships, media frenzy, and the power of human connection in the most unlikely circumstances. What happened next would make Marcus infamous across the globe, transform the life of a career guardsman, and force an ancient institution to confront the modern world in ways no one ever imagined possible. Marcus Chun pulled his jacket tighter against the bitter February wind as he stepped out of the Pret, a manger near St. James's Park. Steam rose from the two large coffees he carried, creating small clouds in the frigid London air. His breath formed white puffs as he walked toward Buckingham Palace, the massive stone structure looming ahead like something from a fairy tale. This was his third day in London, and he had been documenting everything for his travel blog, Wandering Marcus, which had gained a modest following of 15,000 readers who enjoyed his authentic, unfiltered take on travel experiences. The morning was particularly harsh, even by London standards. The temperature had dropped to -2 degrees Celsius overnight, and a light snow had dusted the city streets. Marcus had woken early in his small Airbnb in Camden, planning to capture the palace in the early morning light when tourist crowds would be minimal. He had learned from previous travel experiences that the best shots always came when he was willing to brave uncomfortable conditions that kept other photographers in their warm beds. As Marcus approached the palace gates, he noticed something that struck him as both impressive and slightly troubling. A royal guard stood at attention in his traditional red tunic and tall black bearskin hat, completely motionless despite the freezing weather. The man appeared to be in his early 30s, tall and lean, with the kind of rigid posture that spoke of years of military training. What caught Marcus's attention was how the guard's face, visible below the shadow of his hat, showed no expression despite the obvious discomfort of standing in sub-zero temperatures. Marcus had read about the royal guards before his trip. He knew they were real soldiers, often veterans of combat deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, who had earned their positions through exemplary service. They weren't just ceremonial figures, but highly trained military professionals who took their duty seriously. The tourist guides always mentioned how the guards weren't supposed to move or speak while on duty, creating an almost statue-like presence that fascinated visitors from around the world. But as Marcus watched the guard, he couldn't shake the feeling that behind that stoic facade was a human being who was probably miserable in the cold. The guard had been standing there when Marcus first walked by 40 minutes earlier, and Marcus imagined he would remain there for hours more. The thought of standing perfectly still in freezing weather, unable to warm himself, or even acknowledge the discomfort, seemed almost inhumane to Marcus's California sensibilities. Marcus had always been someone who acted on impulse when he saw an opportunity to help others. In college, he had been known for bringing coffee to stressed classmates during finals week. During his travels, he frequently bought meals for homeless individuals or helped lost tourists find their destinations. His mother had always said he had too much heart for his own good, but Marcus considered his empathy one of his best qualities. Looking at the second coffee in his hand, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He had originally bought the extra coffee thinking he might share it with another tourist or simply save it for later. But seeing the guards standing motionless in the cold, Marcus felt compelled to offer a small gesture of human kindness. He understood the guard probably couldn't drink it while on duty, but maybe the simple offer would brighten his morning or at least show him that someone cared about his comfort. Marcus approached the guard slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements that might be interpreted as threatening. As he got closer, he could see that the guard's face was slightly red from the cold, though his expression remained completely neutral. The man's eyes stared straight ahead, giving no indication that he noticed Marcus approaching. "Excuse me," Marcus said softly, holding up one of the coffees. "I thought you might like something warm. I know you probably can't drink it now, but maybe later?" He kept his voice friendly and respectful, hoping to convey that his intentions were purely kind. The guard's eyes flicked toward Marcus for just a split second before returning to their forward position. It was such a brief moment that Marcus almost missed it, but he caught a glimpse of surprise in the man's eyes. For just an instant, the professional mask had slipped, revealing a human being who was touched by the unexpected gesture. Marcus set the coffee down carefully on a low stone ledge nearby, close enough that the guard could reach it, but not so close as to interfere with his duties. "It's just a regular coffee with a bit of milk," Marcus said. "I'm Marcus, by the way. I'm visiting from California, and I just wanted to say thank you for what you do. I can't imagine standing out here in this weather." As Marcus stepped back, he pulled out his phone to take a few photos of the palace. He wasn't particularly trying to photograph the guard, but the scene was so picturesque with the coffee cup sitting on the ledge, the guard standing at attention, and the palace backdrop that he couldn't resist capturing a few shots. The images would make great content for his blog, showing a more human side of the famous royal guards. What Marcus didn't notice was the small security camera mounted on a nearby lamppost that had recorded the entire interaction. He also didn't see the plainclothes security officer who had been watching from across the street, speaking quietly into his radio about the tourist who had just approached the guard. In the post-9/11 world, any unusual interaction with royal security was taken seriously, and Marcus's kind gesture had triggered protocols he never could have imagined. The guard, whose name was James Wellington, was fighting an internal battle as he maintained his position. In his 8 years of military service, including 2 tours in Afghanistan, he had experienced many difficult situations. But standing perfectly still while a stranger showed him unexpected kindness was proving more challenging than he had anticipated. The American tourist's simple gesture had touched something deep inside him, reminding him of his own humanity beneath the ceremonial uniform. James had joined the army at 18, seeking structure and purpose after a difficult childhood in Manchester. His father had left when he was 12, and his mother had struggled to raise 3 children on her own. The military had become his family, providing the stability and sense of belonging he had always craved. Earning his position as a royal guard had been one of the proudest moments of his life, representing the pinnacle of military tradition and honor. But days like this, standing motionless in brutal weather while tourists gawked and occasionally mocked the guard's inability to respond, tested even his considerable discipline. James had seen guards faint from heat exhaustion in summer and develop hypothermia in winter. The job required not just physical strength, but mental fortitude that few civilians could understand. The coffee sitting just feet away from him was torture in the best possible way. James could smell its rich aroma, could imagine the warmth spreading through his cold hands and chest. But more than the physical comfort, it was the kindness behind the gesture that affected him most deeply. In a job where he was often treated more like a tourist attraction than a human being, Marcus's simple recognition of his humanity meant more than the American could possibly know. Meanwhile, Marcus had moved on to photograph other areas of the palace complex, completely unaware of the ripple effects his coffee gesture was creating. In a security control room beneath the palace, officers were reviewing the camera footage and discussing whether the incident warranted further investigation. The coffee could have been tampered with, they reasoned, or the approach could have been a distraction for something more sinister. Detective Inspector Sarah Morrison of Scotland Yard's Royal Protection Unit was having her morning briefing when the call came in about the coffee incident. At first, she assumed it was another routine report about a tourist getting too close to the guards. But as she listened to the details, something about the situation bothered her. In her 15 years protecting the royal family, she had developed an instinct for distinguishing between genuine threats and innocent mistakes. This felt like the latter, but protocols existed for a reason. "Give me everything on this American," she told her team. "Background check, travel history, social media presence. And I want to speak with the guard who was approached. Something about this doesn't feel right, but not in a threatening way. More like we're missing something important." As the morning progressed, James Wellington continued his duty shift, the coffee growing cold beside him. He had roughly 2 hours left before his replacement would arrive, but the American tourist gesture had fundamentally changed his perspective on the morning. Instead of focusing on the cold and discomfort, James found himself thinking about the kindness of strangers and the connections that could form between people from completely different worlds. Marcus, meanwhile, was exploring other parts of central London, taking photos and making notes for his blog post about his Royal Guard encounter. He planned to write about the humanity behind the ceremony, the dedication required to serve in such a role, and his hope that a small gesture might have brightened someone's day. He had no idea that his name was already being run through international databases, or that his simple act of kindness was about to trigger a series of events that would captivate the world's attention. The stage was set for a story that would challenge assumptions about security, humanity, and the power of unexpected connections between strangers. What started as one person's attempt to show kindness to another was about to become something much larger, touching lives and institutions in ways that no one could have predicted. The coffee was getting cold, but the story was just beginning to heat up. Detective Inspector Sarah Morrison arrived at Buckingham Palace 2 hours after receiving the initial report about Marcus Chen's coffee delivery. The February wind had picked up, making the already frigid morning even more unpleasant for everyone working outdoors. Sarah had spent the journey reviewing Marcus's digital footprint, which her team had compiled with impressive efficiency. What she found was a 28-year-old freelance graphic designer from San Francisco who documented his travels through a blog that seemed genuinely focused on cultural experiences and human connections. The coffee cup still sat on the stone ledge where Marcus had placed it, now completely cold, but serving as evidence of an interaction that had puzzled security personnel all morning. Guard James Wellington had been relieved from his post and was waiting in a small office within the palace complex, still wearing his ceremonial uniform, but looking far more human without the rigid posture required during duty. "Tell me exactly what happened," Sarah said as she sat across from James in the sparsely furnished room. Despite the formal setting, she had always prided herself on treating the guards with the respect they deserved as both soldiers and human beings. Too many people in law enforcement forgot that these men had served their country with distinction before taking on their ceremonial duties. James recounted the encounter with precise detail, his military training evident in how he organized his observations chronologically and factually. The subject approached slowly from the southwest, carrying 2 coffee cups from what appeared to be a manger based on the packaging. He spoke softly, maintained respectful distance, and his demeanor suggested genuine concern for my comfort rather than any attempt at distraction or manipulation. "Did anything about his approach seem rehearsed or planned?" Sarah asked, taking notes on her tablet. Sometimes people practice these interactions, especially if they're creating content for social media. James considered the question carefully before responding. "No, ma'am." His approach felt spontaneous, almost hesitant. He seemed genuinely surprised by his own action, if that makes sense. And he didn't spend excessive time photographing the interaction. Most content creators would have documented it more thoroughly. Sarah nodded, appreciating James's analytical approach. She had worked with enough guards over the years to recognize that their observation skills were typically exceptional. These men were trained to notice details that others might miss, making them reliable witnesses despite their inability to respond in the moment. Meanwhile, Marcus was having lunch at a small pub in Covent Garden, completely unaware that he had become the subject of an official investigation. He was editing photos from his morning palace visit, including the shots of James standing near the coffee cup. The images captured something that Marcus found beautiful: the contrast between the rigid formality of the guard's duty and the simple human gesture of offering warmth to a stranger. Marcus's phone buzzed with notifications from his Instagram account, where he had posted a preview image with the caption, "Sometimes the smallest gestures matter most." Met this dedicated guard this morning and hope to brighten his cold day with some coffee. The humanity behind the ceremony is what makes travel meaningful. The post was gaining traction, with followers commenting about the thoughtfulness of the gesture and sharing their own stories of unexpected kindness during travels. Back at the palace, Sarah was reviewing security footage from multiple angles, trying to piece together not just what had happened, but why it had triggered such concern among her team. The more she studied Marcus's approach and behavior, the more convinced she became that this was exactly what it appeared to be, a tourist showing kindness to someone doing a difficult job in harsh conditions. However, Sarah's concern wasn't really about Marcus anymore. What bothered her was how the incident had exposed potential vulnerabilities in their security protocols. If someone with genuinely malicious intent wanted to approach a guard, they could easily use a similar pretense of offering food or drinks. The coffee incident had revealed a blind spot in their defensive thinking that needed to be addressed. "We need to talk to this American," Sarah told her team during their afternoon briefing. "Not because I think he's a threat, but because I want to understand his perspective. Sometimes outsiders see things we miss because we're too close to the situation." Finding Marcus proved easier than expected. His blog contained detailed information about his travel plans, and his social media posts were geotagged with remarkable precision. Sarah's team located him at the British Museum, where he was photographing Egyptian artifacts for another blog post about London's incredible museums. When two plainclothes officers approached Marcus near the Rosetta Stone, he initially assumed they were fellow tourists asking for photo recommendations. The reality of the situation only became clear when they showed their identification and politely requested that he accompany them for a brief conversation about his morning visit to Buckingham Palace. "Am I in trouble?" Marcus asked as they walked toward a quiet area of the museum. His mind raced through possibilities, wondering if he had somehow violated palace security protocols without realizing it. "I was just trying to be nice to someone who looked cold." "That's exactly what we want to discuss," said Officer Rebecca Martinez, who had been chosen for her experience in managing delicate situations involving foreign nationals. "Your gesture this morning has raised some questions that we'd like your help in understanding." The conversation that followed was unlike anything Marcus had expected. Rather than being interrogated about his intentions, he found himself in a thoughtful discussion about cultural differences, security challenges, and the human aspects of ceremonial duties. Sarah Morrison had joined them via video call, and Marcus was surprised by her genuine interest in his perspective as both a tourist and someone who had served briefly in the California National Guard during college. "What made you decide to offer coffee to the guard?" Sarah asked from the screen of Rebecca's tablet. Her tone was curious rather than accusatory, which helped Marcus relax and speak honestly about his motivations. Marcus thought for a moment before answering. "I guess it was just seeing someone doing a really difficult job in awful weather conditions. I've done some military training, so I have a tiny bit of understanding of what it's like to have to maintain discipline when you're uncomfortable. But mostly, it was just human empathy. The guy looked cold, I had extra coffee, and it seemed like the right thing to do." "Did you consider that your approach might be seen as a security concern?" Rebecca asked gently. "Honestly, no," Marcus admitted. "I probably should have, but in the moment, I was just thinking about being kind to someone. I wasn't really thinking about larger implications. Maybe that was naive of me." Sarah found herself impressed by Marcus's honesty and self-reflection. Too often, people in a situation became defensive or tried to justify their actions in ways that revealed ulterior motives. Marcus's straightforward acknowledgement of his oversight suggested genuine innocence of intent. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, covering topics from Marcus's travel experiences to his understanding of British culture and his thoughts on the balance between security and human connection. What emerged was a picture of someone who genuinely cared about people and often acted on that care without considering potential complications. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said as the conversation was winding down. "Is the guard, James, I think his name was, is he okay? Did I get him in trouble somehow?" The question surprised both officers. Most people in Marcus's situation would be focused entirely on their own potential consequences, not concerned about the impact on someone they had briefly encountered. "He's fine," Sarah assured him from the screen. "Actually, your gesture seems to have had a positive impact on him. But that raises an interesting point that I'd like to explore with you." What Sarah was beginning to realize was that the coffee incident represented something larger than a simple security concern. Marcus's gesture had highlighted the sometimes dehumanizing aspects of ceremonial guard duty, while also demonstrating the power of small acts of kindness to bridge cultural and social divides. "Would you be willing to meet with Guard Wellington?" Sarah asked, not for any official purpose, but because I think you both might benefit from a proper conversation. And, frankly, I think there might be lessons here that could help us improve our protocols. Marcus was surprised by the request, but immediately agreed. The idea of actually talking with James intrigued him, especially after spending the day wondering whether his gesture had been appreciated or had simply created problems. "I'd really like that," Marcus said. "I've been hoping all day that I didn't make his job harder somehow. I'd love the chance to apologize if I overstepped boundaries." As the meeting concluded, Sarah found herself thinking about the broader implications of the day's events. The coffee incident had started as a potential security concern, but had evolved into something that challenged her assumptions about the relationship between guards, tourists, and the institution they all served in different ways. James Wellington, meanwhile, was in his small apartment near barracks, still processing the day's events. The kindness of a stranger had reminded him of aspects of his job that he had forgotten, not just the duty and honor, but the human connections that made service meaningful. He was curious about the American tourist and grateful for the opportunity to express his appreciation for the gesture that had brightened what could have been just another cold, difficult day. The stage was set for a meeting that would transform both men's understanding of their brief encounter and create ripple effects that neither could have anticipated. What had started as a simple coffee offer was becoming a story about human connection across cultural and professional boundaries, with implications that reached far beyond a single morning at Buckingham Palace. The meeting between Marcus Chun and James Wellington was arranged for the following evening at a quiet pub called the Grenadier in Belgravia, chosen for its military history and relatively private atmosphere. Sarah Morrison had decided to attend as well, partly to ensure the interaction remained appropriate, and partly because she was genuinely curious about what would unfold when these two men had a proper conversation. Marcus arrived first, nervous about the encounter and uncertain what to expect. He had spent most of the day researching British military traditions and the specific role of the Royal Guards, wanting to approach the conversation with appropriate respect and understanding. The pub was exactly what he had imagined for British films: dark wooden panels, low lighting, and the kind of atmosphere that suggested countless conversations between soldiers over the centuries. James entered wearing civilian clothes, and Marcus was struck by how different he looked outside of his ceremonial uniform. Without the imposing red tunic and bearskin hat, James appeared younger, more approachable, though he still carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of a career soldier. The two men recognized each other immediately despite having shared only a brief, mostly silent encounter. "You must be Marcus," James said, extending his hand with a genuine smile. "I wanted to thank you for yesterday morning. That coffee meant more to me than you probably realize." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him as he shook James's hand. "I'm just glad I didn't get you in trouble. I've been worried all day that I somehow made your job harder." Sarah arrived a few minutes later, and the three of them found a corner table where they could talk privately. What began as a somewhat formal conversation quickly evolved into something much more personal and meaningful than any of them had anticipated. "Can I ask what made you approach me?" James said after they had ordered drinks. "I've been on guard duty for 3 years, and while tourists often stare or try to get reactions, nobody has ever offered me coffee before." Marcus considered the question, wanting to give an honest answer. "I was watching you stand there in that freezing weather, and I kept thinking about how you're a real person doing a really difficult job. I guess I couldn't reconcile the idea of you being this ceremonial figure with the reality that you were probably cold and uncomfortable. It seemed wrong to just walk by without at least offering some small gesture of, I don't know, recognition that you're human. James was quiet for a moment, processing Marcus's words. That's exactly what it felt like, he said finally. Recognition that I'm human. Do you know how rare that is in this job? The conversation that followed revealed the complex emotional landscape that guards navigate while performing their ceremonial duties. James spoke candidly about the psychological challenges of standing motionless for hours while being gawked at, photographed, and sometimes mocked by tourists who seem to view the guards as living statues rather than people. The hardest part isn't the physical discomfort, James explained. It's the feeling of being invisible as a person while being completely visible as a symbol. People take thousands of photos of us, but they're not really seeing us. They're seeing the uniform, the tradition, the ceremony. Marcus found himself deeply moved by James's honesty. I never thought about it that way. I mean, I knew you were real people, but I hadn't considered the emotional impact of being treated like a tourist attraction. Sarah listened to the conversation with growing fascination. In her years of working royal protection, she had focused primarily on the security aspects of guard duty without fully considering the human cost of the role. James's perspective was opening her eyes to aspects of the job that had implications far beyond her immediate security concerns. Have you talked to other guards about this? Sarah asked James. Is this feeling common? James nodded. We don't discuss it much officially, but yes, it's something most of us struggle with at some point. The pride of the position is real. We're representing centuries of tradition and serving the crown. But the day-to-day reality can be emotionally challenging in ways that aren't really acknowledged. The conversation continued for over 2 hours, ranging from James's military background and path to becoming a guard to Marcus's travel experiences and observations about cultural differences. What emerged was a genuine friendship between two people who had initially connected through a simple act of kindness but discovered much deeper commonalities. Marcus learned about James's deployment experiences in Afghanistan, his pride in his military service, and his struggles with the transition from active combat duty to ceremonial responsibilities. James, in turn, was fascinated by Marcus's stories of traveling the world and his perspective on British culture as an outsider. You know what's interesting? Marcus said as the evening progressed, in all my travels, I've learned that the most meaningful experiences come from unexpected human connections. But I never expected to find one of those connections with a royal guard at Buckingham Palace. Sarah found herself thinking about the broader implications of what she was witnessing. The coffee incident had revealed not just potential security vulnerabilities, but also opportunities to humanize the guard experience in ways that might benefit everyone involved. The guards themselves, the tourists who visited, and the institution as a whole. Would you mind if I asked you both some hypothetical questions? Sarah said, I'm starting to think this conversation might lead to some positive changes in how we approach guard duty. Both men were curious about Sarah's thinking, and she proceeded to explore ideas about balancing security requirements with acknowledgement of the guard's humanity. Could there be designated times when guards could briefly interact with respectful tourists? Were there ways to educate visitors about the real people behind the uniforms without compromising the ceremony and tradition? What if tourists understood that we're real soldiers with real experiences? James suggested, not that we should turn guard duty into storytelling sessions, but maybe there could be ways to help people see us as more than just fixtures. Marcus was enthusiastic about the possibility. I would have approached the whole experience differently if I had understood more about the actual people doing the job. Maybe there could be educational materials or brief presentations about the guards' backgrounds and service. As the evening concluded, all three people felt they had participated in something significant. What had started as a security investigation had evolved into a meaningful exploration of human dignity, cultural understanding, and the possibility of positive change within traditional institutions. "I have a proposal," Sarah said as they prepared to leave. "Would you both be willing to continue this conversation in a more formal setting? I think there are people at the palace who need to hear these perspectives." James and Marcus agreed immediately, both excited about the possibility that their chance encounter might lead to broader positive changes. "Can I ask you something, James?" Marcus said as they stood outside the pub. "When I left that coffee yesterday morning, did you eventually get to drink it?" James laughed, the first time Marcus had heard him express such open joy. "No, it was cold by the time my shift ended. But honestly, knowing it was there, knowing someone cared enough to offer it, that kept me warm for the rest of my duty. It was the kindness behind the gesture, not the coffee itself." Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction hearing that his simple act had had the intended effect. "Well, maybe next time I'll bring a thermal mug," he said with a grin. "Maybe next time you won't need to," James replied. "Maybe we'll figure out a better way to handle these situations." As they parted ways, each man carried with him a sense that they had been part of something larger than their individual experience. The coffee incident was becoming a catalyst for conversations about tradition, humanity, and the possibility of positive change within institutions that had remained unchanged for centuries. The story was far from over. In fact, as word of the evening's conversation reached other palace officials, it became clear that Marcus's simple gesture of offering coffee to a cold guard was about to trigger changes that would affect not just royal guard protocols, but public understanding of the real people who serve behind ceremonial roles. What none of them realized yet was that their story was about to capture public attention in ways that would transform their quiet conversation into a global discussion about human dignity, cultural respect, and the power of small acts of kindness to create meaningful change in the world. 3 days after the pub meeting, Marcus woke up in his Camden Airbnb to find his phone buzzing with hundreds of notifications. Overnight, his Instagram post about offering coffee to James had been shared by a British lifestyle influencer with 2 million followers, and the story had exploded across social media platforms. The simple photo of James standing near the coffee cup, combined with Marcus's heartfelt caption about human kindness, had struck a chord with people around the world. Marcus scrolled through comments from users in dozens of countries, sharing their own stories of unexpected kindness and expressing admiration for both his gesture and James's dedication to duty. The hashtag #CoffeeGuardKindness was trending in the UK, and several news outlets had picked up the story. Marcus felt a mix of excitement and anxiety as he realized his small act of kindness had become something much larger than he had ever intended. Meanwhile, James Wellington was discovering that being the subject of viral social media attention was far more challenging than standing motionless in freezing weather. His commanding officers had been fielded calls from journalists asking for interviews, and the palace press office was struggling to respond to the sudden public interest in Royal Guard experiences. James found himself caught between his duty to maintain the dignified reserve expected of guards and a genuine desire to continue the conversations that had started with Marcus's coffee offer. Sarah Morrison was dealing with her own complications as the story gained international attention. Senior palace officials were demanding briefings about the security implications of the incident, while simultaneously recognizing the overwhelmingly positive public response to the story. Sarah found herself in the unusual position of advocating for the very tourist whose actions had initially triggered her investigation. "The public response has been remarkable," Sarah told her supervisor during an emergency meeting called to address the media attention. "This American tourist has inadvertently created an opportunity to show the human side of royal service while maintaining the dignity and tradition that people expect." The meeting included senior palace staff, military officers responsible for guard operations, and communication specialists trying to manage the growing media interest. What emerged from their discussions was a recognition that the coffee incident represented both a challenge and an opportunity that required careful handling. Colonel William Hartwick, who oversaw Royal Guard operations, had initially been concerned about the breach of protocol represented by Marcus's approach. However, As he read through the public responses to the story, he began to see possibilities for positive change that could benefit both the guards and the institution they served. The question isn't whether we can control this story, Colonel Hartwick said during the meeting. The question is whether we can learn from it and use it to improve how we support our guards while maintaining the standards expected of royal service. As the day progressed, Marcus received a call from Sarah Morrison asking if he would be willing to participate in a formal interview with Palace Communications staff. The request surprised him, but he agreed immediately, curious about how his simple gesture had led to such widespread attention and institutional interest. The interview took place that afternoon in a formal room within Buckingham Palace that Marcus had only seen in documentaries. Sitting across from 3 palace officials, he felt both honored and slightly overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation his coffee offer had created. "Mr. Chun," said Victoria Sterling, the palace's deputy communications director, "your gesture has generated an extraordinary response from the public. We're interested in understanding how you would like to see this story develop, and whether you would consider helping us explore ways to build on the positive attention." Marcus was struck by the collaborative tone of the conversation. He had expected to be lectured about protocol or asked to downplay the incident. Instead, the palace official seemed genuinely interested in his perspective and ideas about improving the guard experience. "I never intended for this to become such a big story," Marcus said honestly. "But if the attention can lead to positive changes that help people like James, then I'm happy to be involved in whatever way would be helpful." The discussion that followed was unlike anything Marcus could have imagined. Palace staff outlined their initial ideas for educational initiatives that would help tourists understand the real people behind the ceremonial roles, while also exploring ways to acknowledge the guards' humanity without compromising the dignity and tradition of their service. What if there were designated times when guards could briefly acknowledge kind gestures from tourists, suggested Dr. Emma Thornton, the palace's cultural affairs advisor. Not breaking from duty, but perhaps small ways to show appreciation for genuine respect and kindness. Marcus was fascinated by the complexity of balancing tradition with human recognition. Could there be educational materials that help tourists understand what the guards have experienced as soldiers? I think people would be even more respectful if they understood the level of service and sacrifice represented by these men and women. Meanwhile, James Wellington was having his own remarkable day. His commanding officers had asked him to provide detailed feedback about his experience with tourists and his thoughts on ways to improve both guard welfare and public understanding of their role. For the first time in his military career, James felt that his personal experiences and emotional responses were being valued as important input for institutional decisions. "The American tourist gesture reminded me why I love serving," James told Colonel Hartwick during their one-on-one meeting. "It wasn't just the coffee offer, but the recognition that I'm a person doing a job, not just a tourist attraction. If we could help other tourists understand that perspective, I think it would improve the experience for everyone." Colonel Hartwick was impressed by James's thoughtful analysis and his suggestions for potential improvements. "What would you think about participating in an educational video that helps tourists understand the background and service of royal guards? Nothing that compromises security or dignity, but something that humanizes the role." James was enthusiastic about the possibility, seeing it as an opportunity to represent his fellow guards and help the public understand the honor and challenge of their service. As word of the palace's positive response to the coffee incident spread through military channels, other guards began sharing their own experiences and ideas about improving tourist interactions. What emerged was a collective voice that had rarely been heard in institutional decisions about ceremonial duties. The media attention continued to grow throughout the day, with international news outlets picking up the story and framing it as an example of how small acts of kindness could bridge cultural divides and humanize formal institutions. Marcus found himself fielding interview requests from journalists around the world, all wanting to understand the American tourist whose coffee gesture had captivated global attention. I think what resonates with people is the simplicity of it. Marcus told a BBC interviewer via video call. It wasn't a grand gesture or a political statement. It was just one person seeing another person who might need a small kindness. I think that's something everyone can relate to, regardless of their background or nationality. The interview aired that evening and was viewed by millions of people across the UK and internationally. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with viewers expressing appreciation for both Marcus's kindness and the palace's open-minded response to the incident. As the day concluded, all the key participants in the coffee incident found themselves at the center of a global conversation about human dignity, institutional tradition, and the power of unexpected connections to create positive change. What had started as a simple gesture between strangers was becoming a catalyst for meaningful improvements in how one of the world's most traditional institutions acknowledged the humanity of its service members. The story was far from over, and the next day would bring developments that none of them could have predicted. Marcus's coffee offer had opened doors to conversations and changes that would affect not just Royal Guard protocols, but public understanding of service, sacrifice, and the importance of seeing the real people behind ceremonial roles. The viral nature of the story was about to take another dramatic turn that would test everyone's ability to manage sudden fame while staying true to the values and kindness that had started the entire remarkable chain of events. 6 months after the coffee incident that had captured global attention, Marcus Chun returned to London to participate in the unveiling of the Guards Heritage Initiative, a comprehensive program that had grown directly from his chance encounter with James Wellington. The transformation that had occurred in those months exceeded anything that any of the participants could have imagined when they first sat down together in the Grenadier pub. The Heritage Initiative included educational displays near guard positions that explained the military backgrounds and service records of the guards, interactive presentations about royal military traditions, and, most significantly, designated appreciation moments when guards could briefly acknowledge respectful gestures from tourists without breaking their ceremonial duties. Marcus stood in the same spot where he had offered coffee to James 6 months earlier, but the scene was dramatically different. A small plaque near the guard position now read, "The soldiers who serve as Royal Guards are active military personnel who have demonstrated exceptional service to their country. Please show them the respect due to all who serve." Nearby, an interactive display allowed tourists to learn about the training, background, and military experience required for guard duty. James Wellington, now promoted to sergeant and serving as a liaison between guard operations and the Heritage Initiative, stood at attention in his familiar red tunic and bearskin hat. But this time, when respectful tourists offered acknowledgement of his service, James was authorized to briefly nod his appreciation, creating moments of human connection that honored both tradition and dignity. The response has been extraordinary, Sarah Morrison told the assembled media and dignitaries who had gathered for the initiative's launch. Tourist satisfaction has increased dramatically, guard morale has improved significantly, and we've maintained all the dignity and tradition that people expect from royal ceremonial duties. The Heritage Initiative had become a model for other historic institutions around the world. Representatives from the Vatican's Swiss Guard, Greece's Presidential Guard, and Arlington National Cemetery had visited London to study how the British had successfully balanced tradition with human recognition. Marcus's blog, Wandering Marcus, had grown to over 200,000 followers who were drawn to his authentic approach to cultural exploration and his emphasis on human connections. The coffee incident had become his most popular post ever, but Marcus had used his newfound platform to highlight acts of kindness and cultural understanding from his travels around the world. "What I've learned from this experience," Marcus told the BBC interviewer who had followed up on the story's development, "is that institutions can change and grow while maintaining their core values. The Royal Guards are just as impressive and dignified as they were before, but now tourists understand and respect them more deeply because they see the real people behind the ceremony." James had become something of a celebrity within military circles, frequently speaking at recruitment events and military academies about the honor of service and the importance of maintaining both professional excellence and personal humanity. His perspective on the balance between duty and human connection had influenced training programs across the British military. The friendship between Marcus and James had deepened over the months, with the two men corresponding regularly, and James visiting Marcus in California during his leave time. Their unlikely friendship had become a symbol of how chance encounters could create lasting bonds across cultural and professional boundaries. The best part of this whole experience, James told a gathering of new Guard recruits, hasn't been the media attention or the policy changes. It's been the reminder that our service connects us to people around the world who appreciate what we do. That American tourist's simple gesture reminded me why I'm proud to wear this uniform. The coffee incident had also led to unexpected policy changes beyond the Heritage Initiative. Palace officials had implemented new wellness programs for guards, including better rotation schedules during extreme weather and improved support for the psychological challenges of ceremonial duty. James had been instrumental in developing these programs, drawing on his firsthand experience and the conversations sparked by Marcus's initial gesture. Dr. Emma Thornton, who had led the development of the educational components of the Heritage Initiative, was amazed by the sustained public interest in the story. What Marcus did was capture something universal about human kindness and respect for service. The fact that it happened in such a traditional setting made it even more powerful, because it showed that even the most formal institutions can embrace positive change. The anniversary of the coffee incident was marked by a small ceremony attended by Marcus, James, Sarah, and the key palace officials who had championed the resulting changes. The event was deliberately low-key, focusing on the values of kindness and service rather than the celebrity aspects of the story. A year ago, I was just trying to show a small kindness to someone who looked cold, Marcus said during the ceremony. I never could have imagined that it would lead to all of this. But I think what it really shows is that institutions and traditions can grow stronger when they embrace the humanity of the people who serve them. The most touching moment of the anniversary ceremony came when James presented Marcus with a small gift, a thermal coffee mug engraved with both of their names and the date of their first encounter. For next time, James said with a smile, though I suspect we won't need it anymore. The Heritage Initiative had been so successful that it was being expanded to other royal residences and military sites across the United Kingdom. Tourism officials reported that visitor satisfaction at Buckingham Palace had increased by 30%, while surveys of military personnel showed significantly improved morale among those serving in ceremonial roles. International media continued to follow the story as an example of positive change and cultural understanding. The coffee incident had been featured in business schools as a case study in institutional adaptation and in diplomatic training programs as an example of how small gestures could bridge cultural divides. As Marcus prepared to leave London after the anniversary celebration, he reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a simple act of kindness. His travel blog had evolved to focus more heavily on stories of human connection and positive cultural exchange, inspired by his experience with James and the Royal Guards. Travel isn't just about seeing new places, Marcus wrote in his anniversary blog post. It's about recognizing our shared humanity across all the boundaries that seem to separate us. Sometimes a small gesture of kindness can remind us that we're all just people trying to do our best in whatever role we've been given. James, meanwhile, continued his duties as a royal guard with renewed pride and purpose. The changes implemented through the Heritage Initiative had not diminished the honor and tradition of his role, but had enhanced it by acknowledging the real people who carried on those traditions. The story of the coffee incident had become more than just a feel-good news story. It had demonstrated that positive change was possible even within the most traditional institutions when people approached each other with genuine kindness and respect. The simple act of offering coffee to a cold guard had created ripple effects that improved life for guards, enhanced experiences for tourists, and showed the world that human dignity and institutional tradition could coexist beautifully. As Marcus boarded his flight back to San Francisco, carrying James's thermal mug in his carry-on bag, he knew that their friendship and the changes they had helped create would continue long after the media attention faded. The coffee incident had become a lasting reminder that the smallest acts of kindness could have the most profound and unexpected consequences, changing not just individual lives, but entire institutions in ways that made the world a little more humane and connected. The Royal Guards continued their centuries-old duties, standing at attention with the same dignity and professionalism that had always defined their service. But now they did so with the knowledge that their humanity was recognized and valued, and that their service created connections with people around the world who understood and appreciated both their sacrifice and their dedication. Marcus's simple offer of coffee had warmed more than just a cold morning. It had warmed the relationship between tradition and humanity in ways that would endure for generations to come.